The unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, we can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Today we're going to talk about the 24th ancestor, the sainted Shishibodai. And our first meeting with his teacher is like this. Shishibodai asked Kakarakuna, "As I wish to pursue the way to enlightenment, how should I exert my mind in order to do it?" Kakarakuna answered, "If you would pursue the way, there is no situation where you need to exert your mind." Shishibodai asked, "If I do not exert myself, who will perform the work of Buddha?" Kakarakuna replied, "If you are involved in exerting, there will be no merit or virtue. If you do not make yourself perform, then that is the work of Buddha. The scripture says, 'The merit and virtue in what I perform is due to there being no egocentric I.'" When Shishibodai heard these words, he entered the Buddha's wisdom. So Shishibodai had studied non-Buddhist teachings and was quite well known. But again, as with one of our other ancestors, he meets Kakarakuna and he changes. He learns that he needs to let go of his discriminating mind, his mind that exerts himself. He probably had a pretty good mind, pretty intellectual grasp of things, but he had to let it go, and he understands and he enters the Buddha's wisdom. We'll come back to this presently. So he becomes Kakarakuna's disciple. On one day, Kakarakuna makes a prediction for Shishibodai. They're looking at the clouds and saying, "What does this mean?" And Kakarakuna says, 50 years after my death, difficulties will arise in northern India, which will assail your body. In spite of this, you will transmit the treasure of the law, so that others can be converted in the future." So having received this personal prediction, Shishibodai went to preach in Kashmir, and he met Bashashita, the next ancestor, whom he made his spiritual heir, and told him, "My master made a prediction to me in private that I would meet with difficulties and my body would be attacked. I will not try to get round this in any way. I will remain here so that you can be endowed with my way to enlightenment and travel to different countries to convert others." And he then imparted the Kesa and the teaching to Bashashita, his disciple. So Shishibodai doesn't try to avoid his karma. He's more concerned about the safety of his disciple and his disciple being able to go somewhere else where it's safer to carry on the teaching. That is he's concerned about. He's not concerned for himself. Regarding predictions about the future, Reverend Master Jiyu used to tell us that predictions are not absolute. It's what will happen if things continue on their present course. It's not predetermined. Sometimes something else comes in that changes things. And she would warn people, if they have visions or dreams of future events, this is not predestination. Things can change and turn out differently. You don't have to get stuck with it and think it's all foretold and what can we do, And, as Keizan said yesterday, our training changes things. Our very own practice can change things. Our heavy karma can become lighter. However, maybe sometimes there's a heavy karmic debt that needs to be paid in full. And maybe Shishibodai saw this and felt it was better just to accept what would happen and not to try to avoid it. And in the Buddha's time, the same thing happened. Well, one of the Buddha's disciples, one of his closest disciples, Mahamoggallana, who was attacked by robbers and eventually killed by them. And Moggallana saw that there was a karmic reason for this. He had done some grievous deed in the past, and this was the karmic retribution, as it were. Not a judgmental thing, but just the karmic consequence. Something done in the far past. And he tried to escape several times from these robbers, and eventually he decided to succumb, to let karma take its course and allow them to kill him. And maybe something of the same sort happened to Shishibodai. Maybe he had a sense that this was something that needed to take place. It's not just being fatalistic, oh, this has to happen because it's been predicted. Maybe he sees a karmic cause and decides it's best simply to accept it and not try to avoid it. You don't always know what happens with another person or how they may see their karma. So, Bhattacharya goes off elsewhere and Shishibodai is teaching, and sure enough, some people try to bring Buddhism into disrepute. Non-Buddhists they dress up as Buddhists and Buddhist monks and do something bad. So the king, who has hitherto been a good Buddhist, is enraged and goes after Shishibodai. He doesn't investigate too much. He's a bit of a hot-tempered king, I think. Because he says, I'm going to go destroy all the Buddhist monasteries. Although I've been a good Buddhist up to now, I'm not having this. And he goes to Shishibodai, sword in hand, and demands, have you found the immaculacy of emptiness of the skandhas or not? And Shishibodai answered that he had. The king then asked, are you beyond birth and death? Shishibodai answered that he was. And the king said, since you are beyond birth and death, you can give me your head. And Shishibodai replied, since this body is not mine, why should I begrudge you its head? Whereupon the king decapitated Shishibodai with his sword. Now often when these sort of stories happen, the person kind of recants, puts away his sword, and becomes a Buddhist or becomes converted. But this king is a bit of a temper, so clearly he didn't quite get it, and he cuts off Shishibodai's head in a rather gruesome way. And it says in the story, white milk spurted several feet into the air from the wound. The king's right arm twisted off and he fell to the ground, and a week later he died. Not a good choice on his part to do all this, but there we go. And who knows how it really was, but clearly he did not understand. It would have been better to leave Shishibodai alone and allow him to continue his work, but he didn't get it. Shishibodai, for his part, had remained constant. He had remained constant. He's beyond birth and death indeed, beyond fear of death, and he really lives by that. Remains constant throughout all of this. He responds very calmly to the king's demands and says, okay, this body is not my own. Why should I begrudge you its head? He doesn't cling to the body, to his life. Now this is a pretty impressive example of non-attachment. And once again, we can look at ourselves. How much do I cling to the body? Do I get all anxious when it's sick or I see it aging? How much do I identify with this body? Think of this body as myself? And if we can remember that all things arise, abide, and pass away like the waves on the ocean, as we've talked about, even if we haven't yet experienced this for ourselves, if we can have faith in this, then maybe we too can remain constant. Even if somebody is not coming to cut our head off, we just feel ourselves getting old or we can't do what we used to remain constant. This is not my true nature. I am not my body. And even if we do become afraid or resistant or even panic-stricken, we don't have to think we've failed at something. We're not like Shishibodai, we've failed. It's not like that. We don't have to be afraid of being afraid. Will I pass the final exam? Will I, die in a good way, or will I be a complete gibbering wreck? Well, even a gibbering wreck is part of Buddha nature. We're not trying to live up to some great ideal of something. There is that within us which is beyond birth and death, regardless of whatever we may do, however we may respond, whatever we may think. And even our unsatisfactory transient body and our little feelings, they're all part of Buddha nature. And as we can widen our embrace, as it were, accept what comes our way, including our own feelings, our own fears, our seeming failings, as best we can, embrace it all, accept it all as part of Buddha nature, entrust ourselves to the great ocean of Buddha nature, and not hold ourselves to some kind of perfect ideal, judging ourselves. As we can entrust ourselves, so we may be able to remain constant. Something in us will remain constant, even if we're afraid. Who knows what may manifest on the outward surface, but inwardly, something in us can remain constant. Now back to our first section, when Shishibodai meets Kakurakuna for the first time, and he asks him, "As I wish to pursue the way to enlightenment, how should I exert my mind in order to do it?" And Kakurakuna sees him coming, and he replies, "If you would pursue the way, there is no situation where you need to exert your mind." And Shishibodai says, "If I don't exert myself, who will perform the work of Buddha?" He's stuck with a self that's doing all this, exerting its mind, performing the work of Buddha, and so on. And Kakurakuna explains, if you are involved in exerting, there will be no merit or virtue. If you do not make yourself perform, then that is the work of Buddha. It's not a you or a me doing things. And he explains further, as scripture says, the merit and virtue in what I perform is due to there being no egocentric I. And when Shishibodai hears this, he enters the Buddha's wisdom, he gets it. It's not a matter of a self performing good deeds and exerting itself, exerting its mind. It's beyond that. And Great Master Keizan says, when you sincerely seek the way, how can the way have any connection with mental exertion? It just obstructs us. We die in one place and we are reborn in another. But because of our mental exertions, we have not made the true returning, he says. Because we're stuck with the self and its views and opinions and its doings. And this doesn't mean we don't need to make great efforts in training. But it's not a matter of trying to figure everything out or being a me doing stuff. And he says, if we want to be instantly in accord with the Buddha's wisdom, as Shishibodai did, he immediately entered the Buddha's wisdom on hearing this from Kakurakuna. If we want to do this, we have to free ourselves from the 4 false views about the world. We have to see that it's not permanent, it's not satisfactory, it's not pure, and there is no self to be found in it. The 3 characteristics of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, that we talk about a lot, plus impurity, which is often added to those 3, the characteristics of existence. Now we note that he's not saying we need to have ideas about impermanence and stuff. It's freeing ourselves from false ideas, the false views. It's not acquiring nice new views about impermanence. It's freeing ourselves from false views. This is important. And also, he says, we need to relinquish the 3 poisons of greed, hate and delusion. Again, it's a letting go. It's not acquiring something. We're not acquiring niceness and restraint and wisdom. We are relinquishing greed, hate, and delusion. And not only all this, but we also have to let go of our ideas about such things as the 3 bodies of Buddha and the 4 types of enlightened wisdom. These are just ideas. They're not our experience of the truth when they're just ideas. Having ideas about enlightenment, enlightened wisdom, is not the same as knowing it or practicing it. As we were saying last night, actually, we were talking about this. We can talk about it, but it's not the same as knowing it for ourselves. However, it can still be helpful to talk about it. It helps to encourage us and point us in the right direction, as long as we know it's not the same thing as knowing it for ourselves, as long as we know what we're doing. Otherwise, what can we say? In a way, we can't say anything. We can just grunt. But that doesn't always help. Keizan goes on. When you've let go of all of these things, the false views and also ideas about enlightened wisdom, let go of all of these things, all these views, going far beyond the state in which you feel that you are holy or are ordinary, he says. You will have forthwith left behind your judgments of being different from or the same as others. Going far beyond the state in which we feel we're holy or that we're ordinary. We will have left behind our judgments of being either different from others or the same as them, either being holy or unholy or the same. We will cease to compare ourselves with other people. Am I as good as other beings? Am I better than other people? Am I worse than them? Actually, we spend a lot of time doing this, comparing ourselves with other people and attributing a me to those better or worse or indifferent. When we come to this stage, we won't be concerned about, am I better or worse? Because we will have gone beyond this egocentric I, as Keizan says, which is doing things, performing the work of Buddha, trying to be somebody. We'll have let that go. We don't have to worry about, am I as good as other people or not as good? It's a deluded view. The Buddha said, any thought of, I'm better than somebody else, or I'm worse than somebody else, or even I'm equal to somebody else, they're all deluded. Because any thought of me in comparison with someone else is a deluded view. It's me versus somebody else. And it's delusion. We've talked about this before. We just do our best, do our training as best we can, without thinking about being me in my training, or me exerting my mind, or me performing the work of Buddha, and so on, me doing stuff. And this is what Kakurakuna was trying to get across to Shishibodai, this me doing stuff. And Shishibodai got it. I'm better than someone, I'm worse than them, I'm the same as them. Where does our real worth lie? Is it being better than others or worse than others or thinking things? Of course it's not. Where does our real worth lie? What makes us feel like a worthwhile being? If there is such a worthwhile concept even, which is debatable. For some people, having a strong body gives them a feeling of worth. I'm strong, I can do things, I can help out, I can help other people. This is good. But what about when our body gets sick or old and we can't do these things anymore, or not as well as we could? Are we suddenly worthless? How much do we identify with our body and what we can physically do? Or what we look like, looking good, pretty, beautiful. When you get old, it's gone. And sometimes when we can't do so many things, or when we're not so pretty anymore, we turn within more and deepen our practice. We cease to take refuge in these external things and turn towards what's important. It's not actually a problem. For some people, it's their intelligence that gives them a sense of worth, their ability to exert the mind and understand things, maybe explain them to other people, help people, teach people, discover things, have ideas, But then what about when we start to lose our sharpness of mind and we're not quite as quick as we used to be? Are we worth less? Maybe we're worth more. Maybe we rely more on the wisdom of the heart rather than on our intelligence. I had an aunt and uncle, and my aunt was a Buddhist. They were very old, they were in their 90s. And my uncle was very keen on preserving the body. He'd run up and down the beach in his 90s, he'd hang upside down by his feet long before anybody else thought of it. He was really healthy, he was always keeping up his health. And his wife had a really good brain. She was really intelligent. She loved opera. She'd studied politics and history and read all this stuff. And they were getting old and fearing death. And he fell and broke his hip and could no longer walk. And he was really sad because he had relied so much on the body, on being a strong person, and suddenly it was gone. And my aunt, about a month later, had a stroke, and her mind was gone. She could no longer read and figure things out as she had. She was, it was gone. But she was a Buddhist. And I heard that she used to do her Buddhist chanting at night. And I thought this was so beautiful because here's this person who's lost her intellect with which she had greatly identified. But her Buddhist chanting remained. It goes beyond the intellect. It's beyond figuring things out, figuring out ideas about, the three characteristics and all that stuff. Just doing her, which is all fine, but doing her chanting, the practice of faith, which is more worthwhile when it comes down to it than relying on either the body or the intellect or on any other attribute. That practice of faith, pledging oneself to the great matter. Like bowing. Bowing is a practice of faith. It's not something we figure out. We could talk about it all day, but it doesn't get us anywhere. All we can do is bow, and that is how we understand it. Interesting. So back to our sense of worth. So for some people, doing good for other people makes them feel worthwhile. If I'm helping other people, then my life is worthwhile. And this is good, but what about when we can't help others so much? Are we worth less than other people? Can we accept help when we need it? Are we too identified with being someone who's performing the work of Buddha, doing good? It has to go both ways. We have to be able to accept help and to trust that we're worth helping. This can be harder than giving help, much harder, to actually be able to accept it and know that we are worth it, and to allow other people the opportunity to give something to us. And there are so many ways in which we may invest our worth in attributes. These are just a few of them. But what it comes down to is that all these things, all these attributes are impermanent, not to be relied on, and they are not our true self. Not fundamentally satisfactory, in fact. Eventually they'll leave us, and eventually we will leave too. And where does our worth really lie? Well, it's intrinsic. Our real worth lies in ourselves, just as we are. Human beings, fallible, part of Buddha nature, just another wave on the ocean that arises, abides, and passes away. It's not less worthy than any other part of the water. Just a wave. It comes up, it abides, it passes away. And we still try to do the very best we can with this human life and this opportunity to train ourselves, to help others as best we can. We do that. And to realize the truth for ourselves, we use this opportunity to the very best of our ability because it's precious and it's rare. But not to get stuck with being somebody performing the work of Buddha, or feeling we're holy, or feeling we're ordinary. Not to get stuck with a view of ourself, being something or doing something. This is not easy. And Keizan knows this. He goes on. It is said that even the Buddhas and ancestors found it hard to reach the place of dark wonder. A lovely expression, dark wonder. We don't even know what it means. Just as well. It is not only difficult for the Buddhas and ancestors to arrive here, but whenever this place comes up for discussion, the Buddhas and ancestors always in the end cease to exist. It's beyond Buddhas and ancestors. And he says, reaching such a realm is truly considered a signpost in seeking the way. And we think, my goodness, the place of dark wonder? I didn't even know what he means. It's just a signpost, Until you have reached this realm, even if you can make flowers rain down from the sky, make the great earth move, expound on original nature and discourse in the dark wonder, you have never caught sight of even the tiniest bit of it whilst upon this truly wondrous way. You think, once again. Even so, he says, the virtues from your meditation can reach a place as ineffable as this and make clear that which the successive generations of ancestors have borne on their shoulders. Do not worry, we can do this, even if it seems way beyond us. We can do it. Even so, the virtues from our meditation, our training, our practice, are trying to do our best to help ourselves and others to keep to the precepts, to meditate. No matter what we may think of our practice, of our meditation, of our keeping to the precepts, our failings, our shortcomings, our distraction, even with all of this, the virtues from our efforts in the way, not being a self striving to be holy or beyond something, but our simple, pure, sincere efforts in the way can reach a place as ineffable as this, seemingly beyond description, beyond knowing. It's not beyond knowing, but it's beyond description, clearly. And make clear that which the successive generations of ancestors have borne on their shoulders. They've carried it forward to us down to the present day. Not to despair and worry when he says things like this. If you haven't reached this, forget it. He's always saying, you can do it. You can do this. He's trying to get us to do the practice. But not being somebody doing the practice, being somebody getting something. How could we possibly ever say we've reached this realm? Could we ever say such a thing? And if we did, we'd very likely get stuck in me achieving something, me reaching this realm, and completely miss the point. So what can we do? Again, we pledge ourselves to the true self, to Buddha nature, entrusting ourselves to that. And he says, as usual, there are my humble words which try to explain a little of this principle. Do you wish to hear them? If you want to manifest the Absolute, do not conceal it. Indefinable in its emptiness, pure in its tranquility, it has been evident from the first. Do not conceal it with the strivings and exertions of a self doing stuff. Just trust in it. Pledge ourselves to it. Live in harmony with it as best we can. Regardless of what we may do or what we may think of ourselves, regardless of all our good-hearted and well-intentioned efforts in the way that we do need to make, regardless of any and all of this, as Keizan says, indefinable in its emptiness, pure in its tranquility. It has been evident from the first. Homage to all the Buddhas and all worlds. Homage to all the Bodhisattvas and all worlds. Homage to the scripture of great wisdom. And tomorrow we'll talk about Ananda.